Gomez, the Dynamics GP Blogster here. Today I actually want to redo a video that I had done before showing you how to pass collections from Power Automate to Power Apps. In this particular occasion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some updated techniques. So we're going to disregard the timers, but we're going to talk about things like, the SQL connector, arrays. We're going to talk about the response action and how we can use all those elements in Power Automate to get back a collection of records over to Power Apps. And obviously in Power Apps, we're able to do something with that collection of records. So stay tuned and let's see how it's done. Okay, so here we are with Microsoft Dynamics GP. And if we go to the receivables transactions area page and look at this particular page, it will provide us with some information about our customers' transactions. So we'll give this a couple seconds to load. And now that it loads, the other thing that we've been asked to do is to just provide a filter here, and we can then distinguish the customer ID and filter out Aaron Fit 001. So if you notice what I'm doing here, I'm gonna add another filter, and that will also give me a status where that status is currently open, and we apply that filter. So we've been asked to create a Power Apps application that's going to allow us to enter a customer ID and just retrieve the open transactions for this particular customer. Now, the way we've been asked to do that is to use a flow created with Power Automate that will receive that customer ID value from Power Apps and retrieve that information from our database and submit it back to our Power Apps application. Now, if you guys remember correctly, in the past, I actually did create a video that showed how to pass a collection from Power Automate to Power Apps, but back then it was a little bit more complex. I used a technique that relied on timers, which then delivered the value, kind of in a delay fashion. So it wasn't the best approach for this particular ability to take a collection from Power Automate and relate back to Power Apps. So this is what this video is about. I want to actually redo that particular video, show you some different techniques, and go from there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually start backwards. I'm going to create a new flow, and that flow is going to be an instant flow particularly. So we're going to create an instant cloud flow, and then we're going to call this get customer transactions, because that's in reality what we're doing. We're retrieving the transactions from a customer, and that's going to be it's going to use a Power Apps trigger, because we know that we want that to be triggered directly from over Power Apps. So we're going to hit create here. And the first thing that I like to do is I like to set up a variable, and that variable, if we type in VRIA right here, we're going to set or initialize that variable and call this variable customer ID, so that we know that that's the customer ID we're retrieving here. And by the way, I like renaming these things accordingly. So that's going to be customer ID, and the value is going to be a string. And the good thing here is we're going to ask in Power Apps for this. Now, this is one of the reasons I like to do this, because if you name your variables before you select the ask in Power Apps, then the variable will inherit, or the actual name of the object will inherit part of that variable name. So it's just a neat technique to move forward. The next thing we're going to do here is I'm going to call SQL, and here's my SQL Server connector. Keep in mind that this connector is a premium connector, so but for all intents and purposes, I'm connecting to my on-premises SQL Server. So it stands to reason that I have to have a connection that is being done through the on-premises data gateway, which means that I have to have on-premises data gateway installed here, which I do in my case. So I have to set the connection. So in this particular case, that would be my desktop connection. And now that I've done that, I can select the server, I can select the database name, and I can select the table. Okay, in this particular case, where this is going to come from is the RM 20101 table, which holds my customer open transactions in general. So if I go to advanced options, what I want to do for sure is I want to make sure that I use some all data filters just to retrieve the value from that customer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do customer number equals, this uses all data syntax. And I want to make sure I put my double quote here. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit and say it equals this customer ID. If you're asking yourself where I get this information from, well, here I have Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. This is my RM 20101 table. And this is going to be the customer ID that I'm going to be passing in. So if I click to run this, these are all the transactions that are returned, which are 72 transactions. Now, but I might only be interested in a few columns from this result set. So I'm going to just choose the customer number. I'm going to go back here and I want to retrieve the customer number. That would be then in my select query result right here. I want to retrieve the document number. Okay, so that's my document number column. So if we go back here, this is the document number column. I want to probably retrieve the document type. So there is a value for these document types that will tell me what type of document it is. So I'm going to go back here and type RMD type all. Okay. And the next thing we're going to go back and do then is we're going to retrieve a couple more columns from here. So I want the document date, and I'm going to then retrieve the original amount and the current transaction amount. So I'm going to get the document date, the original amount, which corresponds to the OR TRX AMT column, OR TRX AMT, and I'm going to get the current transaction amount, meaning the outstanding balance for that document. So that's CUR TRX AM. Okay, CUR TRX AM. Cool. So if this works out, we should be able to test this at this point without any problems. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit save here. And then I'm going to run a test to see what this looks like. So we're going to test this. We're going to manually execute this and then test. So this should sign us into our SQL Server. We're going to hit continue here. And bottom line, what I need is just to enter a customer value, just like I did in Dynamics GP here on my SQL query, shown in Management Studio, and hit run flow here. If I hit done, that's going to take me to the execution of this workflow, which then shows me that I had an output. So that output, if I click on download, shows me the result set of what I'm expecting. So if you notice here, value is the inner result set from this JSON payload, and it probably extends all the way down here to this other bracket. So if you see the bracket starts here and the bracket ends here, it tells me that that's an array. Okay, so let's go back here to Power Apps. To Flow. And what we want to do here is go back and edit this to complete our workflow. In particular, what I'm interested in, and by the way, if you notice here, there's some OData tags for each one of these records. I probably don't need these when it comes to the result set that's being returned. So there is an opportunity to filter that out before even passing it back to Power Apps. And as you can see here, those OData tags and item IDs come down as an extra set of values for this particular record set that I'm pulling down. Hence, what we want to do then is just click a new step here, and we're going to use the select data operation. And that select data operation is going to then allow me to set up an array that's going to basically pull the result set from the value list, and then I can then select the specific columns that I want. So I want customer number, and by the way, I can start formatting those column names the way I want them to appear in Power Apps. So customer number, and that's gonna be my customer number column that I retrieve here. Actually, I don't need to do that. It's probably best if I just select it from the dynamic content. And then the next thing we're gonna do is, if you expand this a little bit again, we're gonna select the document number, and that in effect is gonna come as well from my dynamic content, and that's gonna be document number. Then we're gonna select the document type, and effectively that's gonna come from my dynamic content as well, and that's gonna be the RM. In fact, I can filter it, so no need to struggle with that. RMD type all, and then the document date, and finally we'll select document date from here. So if I choose doc date, then the original amount, so that's the original document amount, and we can then select the original transaction amount, and effectively now the current transaction amount can be selected from that result set. So current transaction amount. Good. So we have all the information we need for this particular array that we just created here with this select data operation. The next thing we're going to do then is we're going to add a new step, and that new step is then going to allow me to pass on that array over to Power Apps. But I want to show you a little thing here first. The first thing that is going to allow me to do that more effectively is just by initializing a variable. If I call this variable customer info, right, and I make that an array, then the value that I'm going to pass on is effectively the output from that select. Now you're going to ask yourself, well, why did you do that? I just like to make sure that things are encapsulated properly inside my flows. So this is just a variable that's going to hold that array information and pass it on to that, pass on the result set of the select. You could have actually done it directly if you wanted to. For me, it's just a matter of maintaining things a little bit more consistent. So now I can go ahead and rename this to customer info. Okay. As far as best practices go, you can come up with your own set of best practices. This in particular, I find it more useful to work with. Now, if I go ahead and do a new step here, the immediate reaction would be to use the Power Apps step to return or to respond to Power Apps or flow. Well, that has a problem. You really don't have the ability to return an array. So what do you do in this case? You can return a text, obviously, you can return a check mark, which this customer info, or for that matter, the result set from the select is not. So you can't pass an array with the respond to Power Apps or flow step. Okay, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna delete the step, and then we're gonna go back and add a new step. And for that, there's a response action. And that response action is part of the request connector. So the response action then is going to allow me to define what I'm going to return. Okay. So as far as this goes, there are a couple of advanced options that we're going to do. But the first thing that we want to return, of course, is the customer info. That's for sure. That's not a problem here. Now, in order to generate the body schema, we're going to have to then test this again. So we're going to click on test here, and then we're going to manually test this out. This should actually ask us now for the customer record again. So I'm just going to type in our sample customer here that we've been using and run this flow. And then go to the run page to see what's coming out on the other side. So here is our customer info. So effectively we got back this array, and this has now been formatted to include just the columns we wanted. So minus the OData tags that were added. So what we want to do is we want to hit Control A here to copy this out. And then we know that the response effectively is showing us the body, and the output is this body as well. But to be on the sure side, what we want to do is go back and edit and generate from sample to include that schema, just to make sure that nothing gets parsed out outside of the definition of that array that we actually created. All right, that's great. So now we're going to hit save here, and we finally have the flow and the response that we want to send back to Power Apps. Now, this is a complete array, so let's see what happens on the Power Apps side. If I go and hit new here, or create an app from blank, what we're going to do is we're going to set up an app here quickly, and this is going to be called Get Customer Transactions. This is our app name, or Customer Transactions simply. It's probably a better name for it. We're going to make it a tablet application, and we're going to hit create here. So effectively, this will open up our Design Studio, our Power Apps Design Studio, Design Surface, whatever name you have for it. And that Design Studio is gonna then allow me to set up the different elements for this application. So here we are. And the first thing you wanna do is you probably wanna drop a label in here. So we're just gonna go ahead and drop a label. And we're gonna call this label, I like to rename everything again, so we're just gonna call this label customer prompt, okay? And simply, this is gonna say, please, customer ID, okay? So we're gonna prompt the user to enter a customer ID. So therefore, there's gotta be some control where they type into. So we can go to text here and select this text input control and move that over to the right a little bit. Okay, so we probably don't want it to say text input. We probably want it to say, please enter customer ID. Okay, and that now will prompt the user for a customer ID value. And again, we're gonna rename this and call this text customer ID. All right, so we have our customer ID. Now, the other thing that we want to do effectively is probably add a button, and that button is then going to allow me to submit this result or this request to Power Automate. So we're going to hit submit here, or type in submit as a caption. And what do we want to do with this? So effectively, what we might want to do with this then is go to action and select Power Automate. And effectively here is our Get Customer Transaction Flow. So I'm gonna click on the Get Customer Transaction Flow here to add this to the result. And what we wanna do is probably run it with the customer ID parameter. So as you can see here, this is telling me what is the customer ID value parameter. And that's gonna come from txt customer ID dot text. So whatever text is entered in that box, that's what we're gonna use as a result set. Now, the result might come in various columns, but if I want the full record set, what I wanna do is I wanna pass this on to a collection. So we wanna say collect, actually clear collect. So any new value that is entered in that customer ID field, I probably wanna enter it as a new collection or within an existing collection. And we're gonna call this customer transactions. Okay, so collection customer transactions. And that's gonna be our result set. We're gonna pass this on. And I'm a C# developer by heart, so I always end stuff with semicolon whenever possible. Okay, let's see how this works then. So I'm gonna run this in test mode. And if I type in here Aaron Fit 001, which is my customer, I'm gonna hit submit. And that should basically run the flow that we just created. So if I come back here and close, and then go to view collections, I can see now that all the different fields that I wanted to lay out there are in that particular collection. So how cool is that? Very easy technique to implement. The other thing that we want to do then is you can enhance this if you want to display the values. You can go to insert gallery and we can actually create a vertical gallery for this. And in my vertical gallery, I'm just going to tell it that the record set is going to come from the collection that I just created. So we can see the customer ID. And instead of making the customer date, maybe what we want to do is we want to point this to a different data field. So let's just select the gallery. Okay, and we're going to edit the fields. And effectively what we're going to do is we're going to have the, instead of the document date, we want that to be the document number. So we're going to point that to the invoice number. And you can add more fields if you want, but I think you get the point. So this is a cool way to show how you can retrieve data from, let's say, a SQL Server data source and pass that collection of records that is retrieved from your workflow, from your flow, to Power Apps. So thank you for watching, and see you guys soon.